Good evening. It's good to be here with you guys today. And I got to say, I'm pretty excited to share this lesson with you guys. I really wanted to share this with you because this is something that I've recently been learning in my walk with God, being in college this year. This is something that I'm just really excited to show you guys, and I hope it's going to be uplifting and encouraging, and hopefully it will help us in our walk with God. Before I get in the lesson, I just want us to imagine a scene for a second. Imagine this man in a congregation. He walks up to the podium, and he's praying to God, and in this prayer, he's being as candid as he possibly can be. And this is what he says in the prayer. He says, God, there's a lot of hard things going on in my life right now. I feel forgotten, and everything right now in my life is dark. And Lord, I can't see any good in it. I've been praying to you for years and years. I've been pouring my soul out to you, trying to find some type of deliverance in you, Lord, but there is none. I feel alone, and my companions, they've all abandoned me, and my only friend is darkness. All I can feel is darkness. And without closing this prayer, he leaves the podium and he sits down in his seat. You know, if that happened today, wouldn't we think that'd be a little strange? We could think to ourselves, how could he not mention all of the great blessings that God has given him? How could he not let God know how grateful he was? How could he not show his gratitude? This man, he wasn't grateful at all in that prayer. All he did was talk about the bad things from the very beginning, and to the end, he talks about how he's in darkness. It doesn't end in a lot of hope. And while I've never seen that prayer done personally, I know a man who once prayed that prayer. His name is Heman, and it's written in the Bible in Psalms 88. So go ahead and turn there. That's where we're going to be for the lesson today. As we imagine this scene, I imagine there's some people here today who might feel the same way as the things I just listed in that prayer. Maybe your life is dark right now. And life is just crashing upon you in these waves time and time again, and all these trials, and you just can't seem to get up. And if that's the case, I just want to say that we're here with you today, and we love you, and we're here for whatever you need. And maybe you felt like this in the past. Maybe you do know what it feels like to only see darkness in your life. You know what it's like to see no hope. And maybe you're also here today, and you've had a pretty good life so far. God has blessed you a lot up to this point, and you don't really know what it's like to have this hopeless feeling. What we see in Psalm 88 is that it shows us the true, genuine reality of life. Sometimes it feels like God isn't there. Sometimes we only see darkness in our life. Sometimes it feels like there's no hope. And, we try to see the light at the end of the tunnel, but there's just none there. And in the mission today, the purpose of what I want to do is I want to look at evidence of this man's trial. I want to see what this man is going through. I want to see the reality of him being in the pit, as he calls himself here. And I also want to see what his reaction and his response is to this great trial he's having. And hopefully, it's going to be something that's going to help us in our own trials today. So let's first read this psalm before we break this down. The first thing we see from this psalm is that it's described as a maskil. This is a Hebrew word which means for causing wisdom. So this psalm is going to be something that is going to cause wisdom in our life. And next we see that this psalm is written by Heman the Ezrahite. What we're going to see is that through this experience of darkness by this man, we're going to see how he has inspired millions of people today through his trials. And my hope is that we can understand how God can work through our own trials, our own suffering, just like he did with the example of Heman. So let's go ahead and read this psalm here. It says, O Lord God of my salvation, I cry out day and night before you. Let my prayer come before you. Incline your ear to my cry. For my soul is full of troubles, and my life draws near to Sheol. I am counted among those who go down to the pit. I am a man who has no strength, like one set loose among the dead, like the slain that lie in the grave, like those whom you remember no more, for they are cut off from your hand. You have put me in the depths of the pit, in the regions dark and deep. Your wrath lies heavy upon me, and you overwhelm me with all your waves. You have caused my companions to shun me. You have made me a horror to them. I am shut in so that I cannot escape. My eye grows dim through sorrow. Every day I call upon you, O Lord. I spread my hands to you. Do you work wonders for the dead? Do the departed rise up to praise you? Is your steadfast love declared in the grave, or your faithfulness in Abaddon? Are your wonders known in the darkness, or your righteousness in the land of forgetfulness? But I, O Lord, cry to you. In the morning my prayer comes before you. O Lord, why do you cast my soul away? Why do you hide your face from me? Afflicted and close to death from my youth up, I suffer your terrors, I am helpless. Your wrath has swept over me, your dreadful assaults destroy me. They surround me like a flood all day long. They close in on me together. You have caused my beloved and my friend to shun me. My companions have become darkness. So in order to break this psalm down and get the lessons that I want to out of it, let's first notice what this man is enduring. Let's notice the trial. Look in verse 3. We see this man is full of troubles. From head to toe, this man, everything he can see, everything he can feel in his life is trouble. There is zero goodness in his life right now. And this idea of being full in the Bible, elsewhere it has this language of being satisfied with this rich and fat food. It's this idea that he's satisfied with all good things. So it's kind of a surprising use of this phrase right here. It's talking as if you eat a meal, and once you do that, when you're full of the meal, you've had enough. You don't want any more. And he compares this to his soul being satisfied with troubles. In other words, he's saying, I've had enough. I've had all I can take. My life is drawing near to Sheol, the place of the dead. And maybe this idea here is just some hyperbolic speech describing his mental state. His mental state is so full of troubles that he's literally reaching toward Sheol. And I just want to make the point that I don't think this is some suicidal idea. I think it's kind of more like what Paul said in Philippians, that being with Christ would be far better. This guy has had enough in his life that he would prefer to die. And like I said, not some suicidal sense to where he's like planned out how he's gonna take his life, but he would like for death to come. And if you feel the same way, just know that you're in good company, because Paul felt this. He said, for me to depart and be with Christ would be far better. But y'all have need of me, so I'm going to stay. I hope it's comforting to see that you're not the only one struggling with this feeling. And maybe it's not this mental affliction. Maybe it's this literal physical affliction. And he really is nearing the end of his life. How many of us can feel for what this man is saying then? How many are suffering with some physical ailment that just burdens us so much and it fills our soul with trouble? Next, in verse 4, we see this man, his soul is so full of trouble, he describes himself as this man who's going down into the pit. He feels this darkness and this isolation in his life. It's this idea that he just can't get out. He's in a pit and he's stuck. And because of this, we see he has no strength. How many times when we're isolated and we're mentally afflicted, and does it make us feel useless? It almost paralyzes us when we're in this deep, dark mental state in our life. When our mind is afflicted, it really does drain us physically. And we see it kind of gets worse for him. From this mental and possibly physical troubles that he's having in his life, it shifts to this feeling of abandonment. Verse 5 and 6, we see this man, he feels forgotten. He's comparing himself to those who God doesn't remember. He's comparing himself to those who are dead. How many times in our life has it felt like that God, he's just forgotten us? What a sad and hopeless feeling that is when we feel that. Not only does he feel forgotten, but he says, it is you, God, that has put me in the pit. He attributes his affliction solely to God. God put him in the pit. God placed him in this situation. And then we see he describes this pit as being dark and deep. This idea of it being deep, he's like trying to crawl out of this pit, but he can't because it's so deep. He can't get out. And then darkness. It's so dark, he can't see anything. He can't see a way out. Have we ever felt like that in our trials? Our trials, they were so hard, they were so dark that we couldn't see a way out. We look for that light, but there's none to be found. And we just feel like God's forgotten us. Notice verse 8. Not only is he abandoned by God, but we see he's suffering this abandonment from his friends, which he says God is the reason for once again. He says God has caused him to be a horror to his friends. Whatever affliction he was going through, whenever his friends saw them, it gave them this feeling of being shocked or disgusted. His friends are shunning him, and it is because of God, he says. And then verse 18, we see not only is it his friends shunning him, but we see his beloved is too, his very own wife. And he attributes this to God. He goes on to say that I have 0 friends. Having this idea that he has no one to comfort him in his life. But his only friend is darkness. The only comfort he feels in life is the darkness he's in. It's this idea that he doesn't have any comfort at all. We see this hopeless picture from this man. And through all this abandonment, he completely attributes it all to God. And I think the big point there that I want to bring out for a second here is that notice his honesty before God. He's pouring out his soul to God, praying to him. He's saying, he's letting God know his feelings, his intentions, his thoughts. He's letting God know everything, every scary thought he's having. It says, it is because of you that I am in this pit. How honest are you before God? Are you treating God as this person who you hide all of your thoughts, your feelings, and your emotions toward, maybe even your sin? Psalms 88 clearly shows us this is not how we should be going before our God. This man is undergoing these intense trials that have put him in the pit alone and with only darkness. We further see the picture that this isn't something that's happened to him for a day or for a short period of time. No, this is something he's been enduring for a long time. In verse 1, we see he's crying out day and night. You know, this isn't a one-time occasion this man is feeling here. No, it is day and night. He is pouring his soul out to God. And then next in verse 7, we see he's overwhelmed by the waves of God's wrath. Notice that it doesn't just say a singular wave that he's overwhelmed by, but it's waves plural. It's this affliction after affliction, trial after trial, he's being pummeled. And I get this picture that he's trying to put his head above the water, and then as he gets there, he gets hit with a trial right then and there. He's just getting tossed around time and time again. Last Christmas, me and my family, we went to the beach, and during that time, it was a time of red tide for the ocean, and so basically the waves, they were just massive. They were huge. And me and my friends, we had the good idea of going into the ocean and seeing what it would be like. I don't recommend that, but that's what we did. But whenever we were in that and you would be in there and the waves would hit you, there's never a time where I felt more powerless in my life. And I think that's what this man is feeling here. This affliction, it's coming time and time again, tossing him around and leaving him powerless time and time again. And then next in verse 15, we see the state of mental affliction. It's been there from the youth up. From a young age, this man has been tossed to and fro by the various waves of God's wrath. From his youth all the way up to now, this man has been in darkness. Guys, it's one thing to endure a trial for a short period of time, maybe a month, maybe even a couple months. But when the trial, it just keeps going and going and going, and you get over the trial at one point, and then this wave of affliction, it just comes and it tosses you and barrels you over once again, and you just have to do it over and over again. That's when endurance gets hard. That's when you start to see the darkness. That's when you start to lose hope in your life. That's exactly what's happening to the psalmist here. From the beginning to the very end of this psalm, we see it starts in darkness and it ends in darkness. That's what this man is feeling. He has endured for a long time. Now, how many of us feel this way? We feel our own trial. It's just been going on, and that's a scary thing. We certainly see this man was going through some immense heartache and affliction, but what is he doing through all of it? We've seen that he's had some pretty honest speaking from this man in regards to what he's going through and how he feels, but what's his response to it all? First and foremost, his response in the midst of being in the pit is prayer. This psalm is so beneficial for us because I think it shows such a great example on what we're supposed to do, how we should respond to our affliction and our feeling toward God. It is prayer. That's exactly what this whole psalm is. I'm sure you caught in on that. But in the midst of this man's greatest trials, what is he doing? He's praying. Not only is he praying, but he's praising God. We are to praise God in the midst of our trials. And why do we praise God? Because it's good for us. He says, "O Lord God of my salvation." He calls this because he believes it. He's praising God because he believes in God. He believes God is the only one to save him. What he's doing is he's acknowledging who God is. While this storm is churning time and time again in his life, what he's doing is he's anchoring his thoughts and intentions in the reality of who God is. God is his rock. God is his fortress, and God is his deliverer. And this is what's giving him support throughout the whole trial. And next we see in his prayer at verse 2, we see the reverence he has in his prayer to God. He doesn't come to God with this entitlement at the throne, kind of saying, like, God, because I'm enduring all this, because I'm going through some really hard things, I deserve to come before you. I deserve to be delivered by you. No, that's not his attitude at all. How many times do we have this sense of entitlement to think that we can just freely come before God's that we deserve to come before God's throne? The reality is we don't. This man, he sees God is a king, and he asks for permission. He says, "Let my prayer come before you." Not only he hasn't forgotten that God is king, even in the pit. We see he understands the reality of who God is and who he is compared to that. He is unworthy. So he asks for permission to come before his throne. We must show God reverence in our affliction. The next thing we see in his prayer is that he has this persistence. We must have persistence in our prayers to God. Verse 9, do you see the persistence this man is having? Every day he calls out here. And what a testament of faith. This man, he's in this situation where he is just full of darkness. And he can't see a way out, yet what is he doing? He's searching. He believes that God is the God of his salvation, despite all of these waves barreling toward him. And still, him being without an answer, he's going toward God. This kind of reminds me of Luke chapter 8 and the parable of the persistent widow. It describes this widow. She's coming before this judge that's described as not fearing God nor loving God. And what she does, she's constantly coming before him, time and time again, trying to get the judge to answer her petition. And finally, because she's gone time and time again, even the unjust judge, he answers her plea. And because of this, in Luke 18, verse 8, Jesus, he gives us a challenge. He says, "When the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth?" When Jesus comes, is he going to find such faith in you? Is he going to find the same type of faith that was in Heman and the widow here? How persistent are you in your prayers? Notice this man's attitude in his trial. Not only is he praying to God in these various ways, but we see the attitude in verse 9, in the latter part of verse 9. Are we truly trusting and putting our faith in God during our trials? It says, "I spread my hands to you." This idea is that in this man's darkest hour, he doesn't know what to do. So what he says is, "God, I give you my hands." I give it all to you because, God, I don't know what to do. He's surrendering all of his own will, his thoughts, his intentions, and he's saying, so you can give me yours instead, God. I give you mine so you can give me what you know, and you can lead me. When trials come and we don't know what to do, what is our first instinct? Is our first instinct to try to dig ourselves out of that trial, to try to go to some worldly way of being delivered? Or is it going straight to God? We have to stop digging ourselves out, but look to God and say, I give you my hands, for you know better than me. This kind of reminds me of Jehoshaphat in 2 Chronicles when this great army was coming up against Jehoshaphat, this army that was bigger, and he was scared of this army. And what does he do in the midst of his terror? He says this. He says, Lord, I know not what to do, but my eyes are on you. Can we say the same? Can we let go of our own stubbornness, thinking that we can just do everything by ourselves? The reality is we can't. We have to surrender. We have to look to God as our deliverer. We have to look to God and surrender like Heman did. We must have these open hands in our trials. And after he says that I'm going to have these open hands to you, God, he kind of shifts his prayer here. He kind of shifts into these arguments or questions that he has before God. And we see in these questions is what's concerning him during this trial. What's concerning him is serving God. He's asking God to please take away these trials because he's saying, I don't know how I can serve you. In verse 10, it says, do you work wonders for the dead? He's saying, God, how are you going to work wonders for me if I'm dead? Do the departed rise up to praise you? God, how can I praise you if I'm full of troubles right now, if I'm suffering all these trials? And then verse 11, is your steadfast love declared in the grave? God, how can I declare your love? How can I declare your faithfulness if I'm full of these troubles, if I'm in this trial, God? This man, he isn't concerned about his own life, his own will, but instead he's thinking about service to God. You know, we must have this same attitude, this God-first attitude that this man is having here. Because he surrendered his life to God, he's able to fully take in what God's will is, and that's what he's concerned about. This is a righteous man, a man whose motivation is centered fully on serving God. How many of us have this same feeling? You know, you want to serve God so badly, but maybe you're just in the pit like this man right now. And you know, if you have that mentality at first, I just want to applaud you for that, and I really respect that in you. And second, just know that you enduring your trials, you're serving God. Never in my life have I been more encouraged than seeing people simply endure. I think it's just such an amazing testament to God's power. When I was back at Florida College for my spring semester, one of the guys that I was rooming with was going through a lot of hard things. He was going through a lot of help situations, circumstances, and he ended up having to leave because of that. And in his life, time and time again, these waves of affliction was happening against him, and it was just so sad to see at times. But what I found in that for me personally is I've never been more encouraged than looking to that example of what he was able to do, and that's serve God faithfully through all those hard trials that he was going through, time and time again. It is encouraging to see people live faithfully, even in the worst circumstances. We are serving God through our endurance. This psalm, what it is, it's an invitation to be honest. So be honest. Pray in your life whenever you're in the greatest darkness, just like Heman did. God knows you. He created you. He created all your thoughts, your emotions, and your feelings. So tell it to him. Don't be afraid. When you're in the pit, come before God with this honesty. God gave us these emotions, and now he's giving us this invitation to throw them all on him. Are we doing that? A practical thing that I like to do in my life, and something that I've seen has helped me a lot, is just make a prayer journal. You know, write down your prayers. That's exactly what we see Heman doing. And I imagine he felt this great sense of comfort, being able to fully articulate how he saw God and how he felt through his trials. Put time and thought into your prayers. Don't let yourself become speechless when you're speaking before God. Something we see to never be the case in the book of Psalm is that these authors, they were never speechless. They never came to a moment when looking at what God had done for them, they never went to that and said, I don't even know what to say. If they did that, we wouldn't have the book of Psalms. But instead, they're always express their feelings. They express who God was to them and how he had impacted them in their life. Or they just express their deepest, darkest feelings. If I could say anything, if you're going through these hard times and you feel this way, know that God's doing a work in your life that you have no idea of. In dry season, did you know that some plants actually thrive on drought? Because what happens to these plants in this time of drought? Their roots, they go deep into the ground because they're looking for water. And you know what God can do in a spiritual dry place in your life? Is he can cause you to fully depend on him. You can pray and you can learn to pray to God like you've never learned to before. Your roots can go deep into the Word of God in search of the living water that he's offering us. And we start to rely solely on God in those times instead of ourselves. And that's the purpose of life, isn't it? To learn how to solely rely on God instead of the things of this world and in ourselves. God never wastes these seasons in our life. Don't be scared to let God know what you need. Let him know how you feel. Be like Heman in verse 13. He's crying out to God. Literally cry out to God. That's what he's asking us to do here. 1 Peter 5:7, it says, cast your cares on him, for he cares for you. This psalm here is to give us comfort when we feel like Heman, and to know that we aren't alone, and that we have others here struggling with the same feelings that we have. And first and foremost, always know that God is there even when it feels like he isn't. Even when it feels like he's forgotten you. We must pour our soul out unto God. That's the invitation today. If you're here today and you want to respond to this invitation, come forward as we stand and as we sing.